Hi, I'm Ralph Tiergart. I lead education at AHOA, and welcome to today's Part 1 webinar for Decoding the Franchise Disclosure Document, or the FDD. Understanding the FDD is crucial for anyone considering a franchising relationship, whether it's going to be with a hotel or some other kind of franchise business. The FDD is not just a legal requirement, it's a powerful tool. It gives you a deep look into the franchise you're looking at. And in particular, it helps you better understand its risks as well as its potential benefits. Well, certainly benefits if you're looking at it. If you understand the FDD, you can assess the financial and operational aspects of the franchise, and you can make a better, more informed decision. You can reduce the likelihood of unexpected challenges down the road, and at a minimum, you can at least see where you can try and negotiate. Marissa Rauchway leads the franchise team at CSG Law, and she's a strategic legal advisor and partner at the local, regional, and national franchising community level. Marissa helps her clients navigate legal issues in and out of court. She represents all facets of the franchising industry, and her clients extend well beyond just lodging into many other aspects of franchising opportunities. So also, she holds a certified franchise executive designation from Georgetown University. AHOA members and guests, please welcome Marissa Rauchway. Hey, Marissa, how you doing today?
Hey, Ralph, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for that introduction. Super excited to be here and talk about, candidly, one of my favorite topics.
Mine too, oddly enough. So I'd first like to have our AHOA members and guests take a quick look at the questions tab. Look for your questions tab on the dashboard in GoTo. If you have questions as we go along, just type them as we go. I'll be looking for those toward the end of the presentation, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. Also, if you do us the favor of staying online, there's a quick 3-question survey, and your answers to those surveys really help us with future education. So, Marissa, I'm going to jump off for a while, and maybe you could talk to the audience a little about something fun about yourself, and then take it away, and let's get started.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Okay, so let me start off. Something fun about myself. I have 2 small children, and this is their first day of school, and they have assured me that they will be perfectly healthy and not get sick and call mom while we are in this seminar. But all kidding aside, like Ralph said, I run the franchise team here over at CSG Law. We're based out of New Jersey, New York, but we have a national presence when it comes to franchising. I have been doing this for approximately 16 years at this point. I mostly, the vast majority of my clients are franchisees. We work heavily in the hotel space, but it really runs the gamut. If there's anyone out there who's not just in the hotel space, but other industries where franchising touches, fitness, fast casual food, etc. We really run the gamut, but do a lot of work in the hospitality arena. We work on what this webinar is mostly about, the transactional, the corporate side, clients looking to purchase franchises, as well as on the litigation side, but that's certainly for another day. Like I mentioned at the top of this, this really is one of my favorite topics, because in my day-to-day practice, when I am talking about an FDD or a franchise disclosure document with clients, first of all, I am particularly pleased because it means I've gotten them at a place where they have an opportunity to talk to their franchisor about things that are in the FDD. And again, that really is a theme that I'm going to keep coming back to, not only in this part 1 of this webinar, but in the next one tomorrow and the third one. Really the theme of, why do you care about the FDD? There may be some people listening to this webinar and possibly a little skeptical, as some of my clients are, at what real value can you, as a prospective franchisee or a current franchisee, get out of the FDD? Is it really, like some of my clients have said to me, just like a marketing tool? Is it really for people who haven't been in franchising, and if you and your family have been in the world of franchising for 30, 40 years, do you really need to look at an FDD? Is it really for the newbies, et cetera? And really, and I'll get to this, but the answer to that is no. It really is a tool that anybody can find value in, and can use to really help their relationship with their franchisor. Once you get into a franchise relationship or expand your franchise relationship, and to really have conversations with the franchisor, again, before you get into a franchise relationship, because oftentimes there are things in the FDD that are surprising, and they're things that you don't want to find out about years in to a relationship, because at that point sometimes it's hard to deal with things that might be surprising in the relationship. So again, in my practice, in my day-to-day, when I'm discussing the FDD and items in the FDD, it's usually quite eye-opening to individuals who are new, as well as who are veterans, and often they're surprised by certain items that are disclosed. So without further ado, let me see if I can move this slide forward. Yes. Okay, so this goes right into the first slide here. The FDD, do I really need to review this? So the answer, in my opinion, is an emphatic yes. Okay, so like the slide says, the FDD provides practical business insights that can help make sense of the business opportunity. Okay, it really provides a lot of value about risks and obligations involved with the franchise that's being presented to you. And again, understanding those disclosures can really help your relationship with your franchisor, and make sure everybody's on the same page. I mean, candidly, the last thing anyone wants, both the franchisor and the franchisee, is for either party to be surprised. And from the franchisor's point of view, often, I would say, when there are issues between franchisees and franchisors, it can arise because there are surprises about what the obligations of both parties are in the relationship. So all of that being said, the flip side of this, okay, I just mentioned on a very general level the importance of the FDD. Does the FDD provide me everything I need to know? And this is probably, or I hope this is an easy answer for those listening to this webinar. The answer is absolutely no. Okay, the FDD is a tool that provides a lot of valuable information, but it is not the end of your due diligence. The FDD is an incomplete tool to aid in assessing and understanding a franchise opportunity. Okay, so, and I'll get to this in a second, the information in the FDD, whether you're in the hospitality space or another franchising space, it is heavily regulated on a federal level, and as well as a number of states have their own regulatory framework as to what needs to be in those states' FDDs. But it requires certain disclosures, but not all disclosures. So again, the FDD provides a lot of information, but it doesn't replace talking to other franchisees, doing your other due diligence. Usually it's a start. So we're going to go to the next slide here. Let's see if I can. Okay, great. So actually I went too far. Just hold 1 second. Okay. I'm trying to move backwards, but all right, let me talk about what I want to talk about, and then I'll get you to the right slide in a moment. So I know I have limited time here, but before I go into the parts of the FDD that are the subject of this webinar, really the first half, let me give you a little bit of background as to where this FDD requirement even came from. And again, I assure you, I'm not giving you background just to give you background, but again, really understanding why there is a franchise disclosure document requirement, I really think can help people understand the value of the FDD. So the franchise disclosure document, the fact that with limited exceptions, franchisors like hospitality brands do have to give this document, these disclosures out, really came about because in approximately early 1970s, there was a lot of complaints about people getting into franchise relationships and lengthy franchise relationships and really not understanding what they were getting into, because this is effectively like a marriage. These are typically long-term relationships, and a lot of people got burned. They didn't really understand the fees that they had to pay. They didn't really understand what happens if they defaulted on their agreement and the franchisor terminated them, that they could be on the hook for all of these extra damages. And people really were losing their livelihoods. So the government stepped in and created, again, both on a federal level as well as states started creating their own statutes to really protect franchisees. That really is the purpose of these disclosure document rules. And over the years, they've been amended, et cetera. But again, this document is for the people out there who are looking to become part of a franchise relationship, or again, to expand a franchise relationship. So, again, as we go through the specific items, excuse me, you're going to see, part of the structure of the FDD, a number of the items, basically the chapters of the FDD, really just pull out information from the franchise agreement. And I sometimes have clients question, like, what is the point of that? Why are there certain areas of the FDD that are just pointing to what the franchise agreement says? Again, it's a protective type of document, because a lot of times the franchise agreements, unless you're a franchise attorney or someone who is constantly looking at franchise agreements, they're not the clearest for, again, people who aren't attorneys. And again, it's just so important to really understand what your obligations are, what the franchisor actually has to do. That's often a surprise to people, that there may be less obligations on the franchisor than they think. So again, part of the FDD is really taking the information out of the franchise agreement and putting it in a form that the intention is that you can understand. So again, that's the point of the FDD. So now I'm just gonna check how I'm doing on time. So again, now I'm gonna go into some of the nitty gritty. And again, because we have limited time here, I really want to give as much practical value to everybody listening to this, that if they have an FDD in front of them, really what they're looking at, and what the different sections they really should be focusing on. Again, I mean, we could do a 3-day seminar on all of the ins and outs and the details of the different sections of the FDD. But again, we all know you're busy people. We really want to give you some really practical pointers on what you should be looking at in each section. So the first section, and again, this is highly regulated. The sections are going to be the same no matter what industry you're in. So the first sections, we'll call them items 1 and 2, because that's how it's going to be labeled in the FDD. Items are basically like chapters of a book. So it's effectively chapter 1 and chapter 2. That's where you're going to find background and experience of the people who are running the brand. And as you can see on the slide, there are nuances to this, but effectively, the franchisor has to give background information on the parents, predecessors, affiliates of the brand, the business experience of the individuals who are really running the show, who are involved in sales or the operations of the business. Now, some of you may be sitting there saying, I've been with this brand for 30 years. This is kind of irrelevant to me. We in the industry all know, who the players are. And that may be true. This may be a little bit more relevant for, newer brands outside of the hospitality space, and that's fine. But I will say that, and I've had clients sometimes surprised when they look at the FDD, because again, what's on LinkedIn, the business experience of the people who you're dealing with, that's not government regulated. What's actually in the FDD is. So sometimes people are surprised by the experience of the individuals, and sometimes new individuals that are running the show. So it's worth it. This is usually not a very lengthy section relative to the other sections. It's certainly worth it to take a look. And if you see something that's surprising, again, can spark a discussion with the brand. So I'm going to go to the next slide and I will try not to skip. Oh, perfect. Okay, so the next items are items 3 and 4. Again, it's going to be the same no matter what FDD you're looking at. So this is where there are disclosures, regarding litigations and bankruptcies. So again, there's a lot of nuance here. You're not going to see disclosures about someone having a traffic ticket. Again, it's typically has to be related to the franchise business, in some way. But again, here are the takeaways. Here's why this is important, okay? So first of all, on the litigation front, okay? One of the keys here is this includes arbitrations and not just litigations. And for people out there who don't know the difference between arbitration and litigation, arbitration is out of court, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes they're confidential. So, if somebody comes to my firm and wants us to do a full country search to see if there are any court proceedings that has to do with a particular franchisor or the people who run that franchise, we can do that, right? But if it comes up nothing, that doesn't necessarily mean there's no disputes, because we can't as easily search arbitrations. But again, the FDD requires that arbitrations get listed here. The other sort of important things that you typically look at in this section is, what types of lawsuits are being listed here? Is there a particular category of lawsuit that several franchisees keep bringing? That would be important information to know. Again, it might broach a conversation with the franchisor, like what's going on here? Are there government actions against this franchisor? Is the franchisor taking action against franchisees? Again, it's often just the start of a conversation. And again, there also is requirements about listing bankruptcies of individuals in power at the franchise brand. Again, all information that you're going to want to know before you get involved with the brand. So moving right along. Okay, so items 5, 6, and 7. So these are money cost focus. This is one that people are typically very focused on, and as they should be, because this is where disclosures about what your costs. And again, the key point here is the not all the costs in this area are guaranteed to fit in what the disclosures are showing, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. So first, this section is going to show what your initial the initial fees that you're paying the franchisor or one of the franchisor affiliates. Again, this is usually pretty straightforward, but again, this goes to the initial franchise fee. The next section is going to be all those recurring fees and costs that you're going to have to pay. This goes without saying, pay very close attention to this. This is an area where, again, I absolutely get calls about people surprised because they didn't appreciate certain fees. And again, in the hotel hospitality area, loyalty program fees, liquidated damages fees if you are terminated. A number of people you sort of get caught off guard that once they get terminated, depending on what brand they're working with, they could be on the hook for years of future fees. So again, this is a really important disclosure area to really appreciate what your costs are once you get involved with this brand. The other thing to keep in mind, this is what I alluded to before, is that this area of the FDD provides what your initial investment is likely to be. And the key word likely, this is an estimate, and it is often provided in ranges, okay? So a couple things on this. One, and this hopefully goes without saying, don't assume you're going to be on the lower end of the range. Again, this goes back to, this is not, the FDD is not your entire due diligence, right? Getting ranges of initial investments is usually where you start the conversation, where you start talking to other franchisees, you start talking to the brand, you do your own due diligence to see where you likely fall. And then I have clients who sometimes come to me, you know, assuming that the franchisor is locked in to this estimate, and that's if you're outside the range, you know, somehow the franchisor did something wrong in the FDD. Not necessarily. These are good faith estimates, and you still have to do your own due diligence on. Okay, so moving right along. Okay, so item 8, restrictions on products and services. This is another area where I find it can be very eye-opening, particularly with the new franchisees who haven't done franchising before. So item 8 requires a disclosure on obligatory purchases, restrictions on sources of products and services, and the amount of any revenue franchisor may receive, like a kickback or a rebate from required suppliers, okay? Excuse me. So what does that mean practically? So there's a few things here. One, you know, this also takes information out of the franchise agreement and effectively puts it up front, because this is such an important point here. So most franchisors, most franchise systems, I would go as far to say virtually all of them, does not let you go out and purchase whatever you want, and certainly not sell whatever you want. Okay, there are often approved suppliers, and you have to use the approved supplier list, or even required suppliers. And that may not make financial sense for you, depending on what area of the country you're in, depending on what the product is. I've had many phone conversations with clients who say things to me like, look, this product I need to purchase, I can get for half price down the road. You know, can I just do that? And oftentimes there's a procedure in your franchise agreement that says if you want to use a different supplier, you know, we have to approve it, and here's how we need to approve it. Here's the procedure, and it almost always says that they have the ability to reject it. So that procedure is actually disclosed. That has to be in the FDD. And again, I'm just going to, you know, keep going back to this theme. You know, it's such an important thing to know before you sign up to, again, at minimum, if it's something that doesn't sit well with you, that to have a conversation with the brand about it, to have a conversation with other franchisees about it, to not get into a point where, you know, 6 months in, a year in, you realize that, you know, there's going to be a cost issue, or there's some issue you have with the approved supplier list. So again, this is where the FDD comes in hand and is super helpful often in putting this up front. So again, you can either talk to the franchisor about it. Sometimes you can even get amendments. Again, depends on the franchise, and there's all sorts of nuance there. But to not get into a position where you're surprised, and you want to be in a position where you can assess whether this franchise makes sense to you. Excuse me. And just one more point on this. It probably goes without saying, but If in the FDD there's a disclosure that the franchise is getting a high amount of kickbacks or rebates based on the use of a supplier, it is practically speaking going to likely be difficult to get approval for a different supplier. So again, something to know upfront. Let's see if I can move. Okay, item 9, franchisees' obligations. So in my view, this is one of the most important sections, even though, you know, I've had clients who kind of skim over this because often they say, you know, this is in the franchise agreement, you know, et cetera. But this is a much easier way for you to see what you are on the hook for in this franchise system than just reading the franchise agreement. Because again, the franchise agreement, a lot of it can be considered or might be considered legal jargon. Sometimes, you know, they're written away that, again, if you're not a lawyer, might be more difficult to understand. This item 9 brings up to the forefront all of your principal obligations, and by you I mean a franchisee, that are set forth in the franchise agreement. And it's not just the franchise agreement, it also points to, it cross-references the FDD, where there are other obligations that are disclosed for how a franchisee, you know, has to act during the life of the franchise. You know, like we have on this slide, it's effectively a roadmap of a franchisee's primary obligations under the franchise agreement. So it gives you a relatively easy way to look and see like what you're on the hook for. And if you see something that you're concerned about, again, you know, you have the opportunity to bring it up to the franchisor before you sign on. So again, highly suggest that you look at item 9 and really make sure you understand your obligations as a franchisee. Okay, so item 10, I'm not going to spend too much time on. This is just a requirement that if the franchisor is providing financing, they're very clear about what the arrangement is. Again, it just goes back to the theme of the FDD is trying to make it easier to understand what you're on the hook for in the franchise relationship and what the franchisor is on the hook for. So again, this one is a little self-evident, but I do want to note that it is in here. There's a financing component. Okay, item 11. I feel like I have maybe made this comment previously, but I'm definitely going to say it here. Item 11, franchisors, assistants, advertising, computer systems, and training, what the franchisor has to do is probably one of the most common issues that I get called about by people who are in franchise relationships, and again, both in hospitality and other industries, and they are upset about what the franchisor, candidly, what they view as them not doing, what support they are not doing. And then we have a conversation about what was disclosed in item 11. This is, again, a significant section to understand before going in what the franchisor is actually obligated to do. And that is very different from what a franchisor possibly has done in the past. And again, this happens all the time where you know, individuals or companies who are franchises, who own franchises, you know, have had the franchisor do things and help them in ways that they aren't necessarily required to do under the franchise agreement, and then get surprised when there's new ownership or something changes, and suddenly they're not getting that support, and you know, they think there's something wrong. The franchisor is not doing what they're required to do. So it's really important to understand what the actual obligations of the franchisor is. And again, key takeaways from this section, and this is often a very long section of the franchise agreement, is this is going to disclose the franchisor's obligations pre-opening, like everything they need to do or they are required to do under the franchise agreement before you open, as well as any ongoing support. And people are often surprised that when they look at this section, there's a whole lot of discretion. And that's understandable, right? Or it may be, but the idea is that often franchisors don't want to bind themselves to doing specific things that they may or may not be able to do. But at the end of the day, it's super important to understand what kind of assistance they're actually required to do. So again, 1, 2, even 6 months, into a franchise relationship, you don't have an argument between franchisee and franchisor because there's a disconnect between the expectations of one party versus another. So again, a super important section. And there's all sorts of other information here, but again, just because of time, I'm trying to focus on things that I've seen in my practice, have caused issues between brand and franchisee. And at the end of the day, of course, why do we care about those issues? Because it often affects the bottom line of your business. So absolutely, item 11, certainly pay attention what the franchisor is actually required to do. And then I'll just make a brief comment. This also goes into the training that they're required. There's going to be a table of how many hours and the location and what kind of training you're going to get. And there's going to be a whole area on technology and required technology. Again, there's a lot of information here, and it's going to behoove anybody who has an FDD and is about to enter a franchise relationship to really review this. And if you have questions, that's when you should be talking to the brand, not after you sign a franchise agreement. Okay. All right. I think we're doing okay on time. So this is the last item that we're going to talk about in this webinar. There's 23 items. We're going to hit 12 on the first 12 on this webinar. Be sure to catch us on the next webinar when we do the next 11. Okay, so item 12, territory. So this section is going to be all sorts of information concerning any assigned territory that you get and any applicable sales restrictions, okay? Excuse me. So once again, I'm just going to highlight things that I have seen in areas where this section has proved to be very illuminating for people when they do review it. So oftentimes, if the brand that you're dealing with, and again, now I'm talking about not just the hotel industry, but just franchising in general, because it will apply to any franchise industry here. If you are going to get a territory, a protected territory, my clients, some of them seem to be surprised that when they look at the FDD, they say that the FDD discloses that the territory is not exclusive. And they say, well, wait a minute, I thought I have a 5-mile territory, 20-mile territory, whatever it is, it depends on the industry. And you will see that there are typically many carve-outs to a territory, and those carve-outs are listed here. So you have to really pay attention to what you're actually getting, and whether the franchisor has retained the ability to put a competitive business, but not the exact same brand in your territory. And again, there's often all sorts of exclusions, which effectively boils down to they just can't do literally the exact same thing within the territory that they've provided to you. Again, it's something to discuss with the brands if you have concerns about the carve-outs. It also talks, there has to be disclosures here if, what happens if you're required to relocate, what that process looks like. Franchisor has to disclose that. And I mean, again, at the end of the day, what's in item 12, the territory, should be consistent with what's in the franchise agreement. But the idea is it's supposed to be provided in a more layman's way of wording it. that doesn't necessarily happen, but that's the idea. So like with all of the other chapters of the FDD that we talked about, the other items, oftentimes it is just sparks a conversation with the brands. Sometimes it can lead to an amendment. But at the end of the day, you are not going to want to find out about your territory and what the parameters really are, a year, 2 years, 3 years into a franchise agreement when you've already signed on the dotted line. And there's not much you can do about it if you're not happy with what the territory actually means. So, okay. So that's really it on, I know I really blew through the first 12 items of the FDD, and I see Ralph has just jumped on, but I think we have 5 minutes or so for questions. So take it away, Ralph.
Well, you covered a lot there, and hopefully people got your strong encouragement that this is a document that you need to be pretty familiar with. And I kind of like highlighted the 4 or 5 sections that really, if I was going to buy a franchise, if I didn't read anything else, at least I know which ones I need to read now. So let me ask a question, because a lot of our franchise, a lot of our HOA members don't just build new hotels and start a new franchise agreement. They also purchase hotels. So how does that work? Is that considered the same thing? Are they automatically given an FDD if they're buying an existing opening and operating business?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's a funny thing, because I would say that franchisors often provide FDDs. Clients come to me all the time looking to purchase from an existing franchisee, and they have the new FDD, and we review it and move forward. That being said, technically under the federal laws, okay, so when I say under the federal laws, there are a number of states that have that have additional disclosure requirements, but I'm talking about just under the national law, which still applies, which will apply to every state in the country. It actually specifically says that a purchase of a franchise from an existing franchisee doesn't count as the franchisor selling a franchise, meaning that they don't actually have to give an FDD to the prospective buyer. There's a little nuance there, because the regulation specifically says that that's only the case if the franchisor isn't heavily involved. If the franchisor is super heavily involved, and I realize that's a very vague phrase, then yes, then they may have to provide an FDD, and to be on the safe side, they likely are going to provide an FDD. But if they are just approving the new buyer, and the regulation actually specifically says that if the franchisor is, all they're doing is approving the new buyer, they do not have to give them an FDD. So it's a weird quirk, in my opinion, in the technical law there.
Well, it's interesting, because that doesn't mean that you cannot ask for one. And I would imagine that probably most franchisors are hoping that this is the beginning of a long relationship, and if you're building something, they have to give it to you. I would suspect that's something you should still want to ask for, even though they're not required to give it to you, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm actually handling this for a client right now. I mean, oftentimes clients come to me and they're not really sure. They're not really sure whether they want to buy an existing or they want to, start fresh, so to speak, and just get a franchise agreement and build from the ground up. So that's often happening. So if that's the case, then you're going to get an FDD, right? So it's often the case where if you're looking to potentially not buy from an existing, then you're going to get an FDD anyway. And again, a lot of, not every single one, but most of these rules are really a franchisor concern, so there's no harm in asking, right? If the franchisor is saying no because they're concerned about a legal technicality, what I find is the franchisor is going to explain, like, look, here's why we don't feel comfortable doing this. Again, in the case of getting an FDD, in my experience, franchisors are erring on the side of providing the FDD because they certainly don't want to get in a position where they're, told that no, you should have disclosed, which can be all sorts of problems for the franchisor.
So, Marissa, I'm seeing a question. How often is the data changed in these things? Is it an annual thing? Is it multiple times a year? What's your advice on that?
Such an important question. So again, I'm talking on the federal, the federal landscape right now. So usually most franchisors are doing their annual update by the end of April. And again, it's a function of when their fiscal year is. So not always, but usually everyone's doing it by the end of April. And then the data is as of the last year. So if you're getting an FDD and it comes out in April of 2024, the data is typically from 2023. You're not going to get that first 6 months from January or 5 months from January to April of 2024. So that's how recent the data is. There are a few exceptions to that, or the franchise regulations will require amendments mid-year for like really big things. Like, for example, if the entire management is different, it's a completely different group that's running the show. I believe a bankruptcy can give rise to, an amended FDD. So generally speaking, it's the year prior, but sometimes there are big things that cause an amendment and you'll get more recent data, but that's not the norm.
Okay, I was seeing another question is if you're signing a franchise contract, is the FDD binding or just informational?
Yeah. So here's the main takeaway. And again, I'm going to give you such a lawyer response of it depends, but putting aside that very lawyerly response, here's the general rule. The general rule is the FDD is not a contract. The FDD is just a bunch of disclosures, okay? And again, depending on what state you're in, if there are intentional lies in the FDD, that's a different, universe. But the agreement, the contract is the franchise agreement, and any other ancillary documents that you sign that are contracts. That's what gives your obligations and the franchisor's obligations. And if somebody doesn't abide by one of them, that's where we talk about there's been a breach of contract. The FDD is not a contract. It is not an agreement. We're going to get to this in the next webinar, so stay tuned. But because I get this question often, when you sign that receipt page, that is not you signing an agreement. I have a number of people who are new to franchising, and it makes perfect sense. This is certainly not a knock. Very concerned about signing that receipt page, thinking they've just signed a contract. The FDD, not the contract. The franchise agreement is the contract.
Makes sense. Makes sense. One of the things that you just brought it up, is that we are delighted that you and the CSG team are helping us with by breaking down this big topic into 3 pieces. This part 1 has covered the first 12. You mentioned we're going to go through 13 through 23 in our next webinar, which is tomorrow. And then we have a bringing it all together, kind of getting into the weeds with some examples. And you want to give people a sneak preview of what's in it for them on webinar number 3 when we get into some of the weeds on where it becomes real for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I sort of couldn't contain myself. And I know that during this webinar, I sort of started giving a sneak peek as to, issues that clients have had. And not even just my clients, just being in the franchise world, you hear about issues, et cetera. Yeah, I mean, the third webinar is really where the rubber hits the road, right? Like, I'm talking kind of 50,000 foot here, like you should pay attention to this, you should pay attention to this. But webinar 3 is really giving concrete examples of when, again, either in my practice, obviously, no names will be used. You won't be able to tell what franchise I'm talking about. But either in my practice or just, being in the franchise world, it's not, it's a relatively small world of franchise attorneys. Stuff that we've seen, and a lot. I will tell you, a lot of these real world examples are from once people are in the thick of their franchise agreement, when things come up that could have been addressed if there had been, greater attention, I would say, to the FDD. But also the flip side, things, positive things that are happening between franchisor and franchisee, because a prospective franchisee looked at the FDD, had a conversation, and again, it's certainly nowhere near a guarantee, but sometimes amendments happen. And again, I'm talking now full scale of franchising, not just hotel brands, but sometimes amendments happen from something disclosed in an FDD in a conversation between brand and franchisee that made a difference. So again, I realize I'm being a little close to the vest here because I'm not giving details, because I want you guys to all come to webinar 3. But I want you guys to really understand that this is practical. This is not an academic exercise of looking at the FDD. This is hopefully something that's going to really help.
And we intentionally, Marissa, when you and I talked about this, we wanted to keep it broad in discussing the FDD, because so many of our AHOA members with such deep family legacy skills in franchising are considering franchising things other than hotels. And I think to somebody who's only franchised hotels, you get trapped into a mindset that lodging compared to other franchising opportunities is probably, I'm on a limb here a little bit, but probably more rigid as far as things you cannot negotiate. It's my experience and what I've heard that other kinds of franchising, especially with franchise concepts that are reasonably new or they're not that established, there's a lot you can negotiate. And that's another reason we wanted to do this webinar, because many of our members may not be accustomed to the idea that so much can be negotiable when you start looking at franchising opportunities outside of lodging in particular. So again, good to know what's in the FDD, where to find them, and then hopefully in the capstone we can kind of put an underscore around things you've seen out there where they really can be more negotiable than you might think if you're outside of lodging.
I mean, absolutely. And we will go through that. I will go through things that are common. And again, Rob, you hit the nail on the head, really more outside of lodging and really more of these emerging concept, new franchises trying to get their first franchisee. And look, we'll talk about the pros and cons of that also.
Okay.
But just to give your audience a flavor of what can potentially reasonably be negotiated.
Yeah, I did have a question that came in. Is there going to be a link for the recorded session? We don't provide links to everybody who attends, but if you go to AHOA, we'll have this webinar up on our website within 48 hours. And as you log into your AHOA account, you'll be able to click the link and watch this webinar again. And we'll do the same with tomorrow. We'll put tomorrow's up and Wednesday's up, so all 3 will be together shortly. Marissa, I'd like to thank you for your time today. There's so much more we could go over in this area, but we've got 2 more bites at the apple. So I want to thank you and the folks at CSG for being great AHOA partners, and like to thank members who've joined us and guests who've joined us today. And we look forward to seeing you on the next AHOA webinar, which is tomorrow. So thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. You have a great rest of your week, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
My pleasure, Ralph. Hopefully see you guys tomorrow.
Bye now.